I'm Stephen Foskett, organizer of Tech Field Day, and we are here at Storage Field Day 24 in Santa Clara. We are having some delegate roundtable discussions, and the topic in our previous discussion rapidly turned from hardware to software, hardware to data, hardware to systems, hardware to anything but hardware. It seems that infrastructure is no longer the topic, even here at Storage Field Day. It's all about data. It's all about systems. And I think that that reflects the reality of this modern world. I'm going to put Ray on the spot because I think that you brought this up in our last discussion as well, that, it's more and more data. It's more and more, even more than the systems can hold. There's more data processing. There's more everything happening now. And it really isn't about the individual components of the system anymore. It's about the data, right? Or am I
Yeah,
putting
I
words
mean,
in your...
to a large extent, this whole AI, ML, modern workloads is all about processing data, doing data, it's data-defined algorithms to a large extent, is what it is. And without the data, you can't have these algorithms and AI and ML and all this stuff. And it's not AI, ML, it's big data, it's all the analytics that are out there that drive this stuff. So data is opening up a whole plethora of new functionality that didn't exist before. But in reality, we're not even capturing maybe 10% of the data that's going through the world today. And so that's my problem from a storage infrastructure perspective. Infrastructure still matters. If there's 90% of the data is being discarded, why is that? That's because the infrastructure can't handle it fast enough. That's why the infrastructure is too damn costly to support 175 zettabytes of storage in your 12 rack array or something like that. There is a problem here, and infrastructure is the answer. You cannot say that infrastructure is not important. Sorry. That's me.
My point of view is, well, somehow similar, but not actually identical. I mean, so I think about the cloud, and everybody went to the cloud because this abstraction from the infrastructure, cloud first, you remember a few years ago, oh, let's go to the cloud. And now everybody, not everybody, but actually people start thinking, look, maybe the cloud is expensive because we are renting stuff from others instead of owning it. And of course, we have developers that are ruling and they don't know anything about the infrastructure. So how much does it cost? I mean, we can get the XYZ 12L whatever from Amazon, which is the biggest instance possible, and then at the end of the month you see the bill. So the idea here is, you can abstract as much as you can. You can think about data, you can think about everything you want, but at some point you hit the hardware. And if you didn't design the hardware, if you didn't think about how the hardware is used, and if it is optimized, if you did the right provisioning, etc., 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 then everything falls apart because the cost is just off the roof. So the idea here is, yes, data, everything, but sooner or later you will touch on the other side. This is also why many enterprises now are thinking differently. So yes, we like the flexibility of the cloud because it gives us a lot, but actually we like on-premises again because it costs less.
No, speaking of costs, if you are a business, you can't say that you spend no money to run your business. And in order to run your business in this day and age, you have to have data, which has to live somewhere, whether it's up in the cloud or whether it's on premises or whether it's both. However you decide to do that, it still has to be on some sort of infrastructure that you've researched, installed, purchased, unpacked, racked, or just clicked a button on Amazon. The infrastructure is still there. It may be more invisible on the cloud side, but definitely in businesses that are hybrid or still on premises completely, or in air-gap solutions for different government contracts or things that you don't really think about on a day-to-day basis, infrastructure is a real live thing. It's just a little bit easier to do now than it used to be because it's so fast and because people take it for granted. But when it goes down, everybody points at you and goes, what happened to the infrastructure? I'm like, I don't know. What happened to your credit card that you didn't update into Amazon's website that you let expire, which your infrastructure is now down because they cut off your billing?
But that doesn't sound like an infrastructure problem.
But it is an infrastructure problem because if you don't know the credit card's down, you now no longer have your infrastructure. The other way around that is if you don't use Amazon and you have a server support contract that expires and your server dies, well, now you don't have infrastructure anymore. So there are still people doing this. It's just in a different capacity than they used to be doing it.
Well, I think even on premises, it's a lot more this type of way. I mean, when I was actually working at various different companies, the big push for the past 10 years has been to turn whatever your data center is in your enterprise business into a private cloud. Have the consumption model be very similar to the way that clouds are consumed, rather than have, Gina has a workstation under her desk and Ray has a laptop in front of him, and you have a engineering workstation in your lab or whatever. It's just all one big cloud consumable set of resources that are divvied up the way the various different people need it. So the infrastructure is definitely there, but it's often managed more centrally and consumed in more of a cloud-like way. I mean, I don't like to use the term cloud-like because it makes you think of like the hyperscaler cloud providers, but on demand, yeah, on demand, self-service, on demand use of the infrastructure resources.
Well, I would say that anybody who says that infrastructure isn't as important, right? Obviously, the data needs the infrastructure, but you can't find a major IT OEM or any data center company that isn't growing. If infrastructure was actually not as important, which it should be obvious that it's not, because everybody is growing in the industry, and some of them are growing pretty fast. The difference is, though, I think there's an increased stratification within the industry of what the different levels need to consume. So as data has gotten so big, as we had the last conversation, and the challenges of moving it around, accessing it, presenting it to consumers, analyzing it and creating algorithms, stuff like that. The data scientist, the data modeler is a stratification of the industry didn't exist 20 years ago. And so those people are consumers of data that consume them in different ways that were ever consumed in the past. So that's a new stratification. They don't care about the storage, they care about the data, right? So if that's the case, okay, so that's a whole new consumer, and their customers above them are the business people. Well, in the past, the business people would consume the data directly. Now they've got this new stratification in between. So the data is important to those data modelers and the data scientists. The infrastructure is not, but the infrastructure still needs to support that type of consumer, and that's what's changed. So I think everything is still as important as it ever was. It's just who it's important to has changed.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, my experience having been on the R&D side and having to deal with the CIOs of the world, there is a shift where it used to be that infrastructure was the business value and the reason to invest and then get the best out of the hardware. Now they kind of flip it by saying we want to use the workload to extract the value, and then let's figure out what kind of infrastructure comes out of it. And it creates an abstraction level where the hardware becomes less and less a decision that they have to make early. It's kind of a late decision point. Second thing I would like to mention is what Ray is saying about why are we only collecting a percentage of all the data you have access to is actually economical. And the way to think about it is like this. If you're an organization and you have a 10-year plan, and you say, I'm going to spend $100 million over 10 years, you can ask yourself the question, am I going to spend on day one $100 million on brand new infrastructure and buy nothing for the remaining time? Or do I invest every year $10 million? And the reality is people understand that infrastructure improves in quality and performance, and also the software algorithms get better and better every year. So that $10 million you spend every year is not only worth $10 million, but it's probably worth 20 million compared to the year before. And so that's why enterprises limit deliberately their spending on a yearly basis, because they know that if they spend too much, the return on investment is not as high as waiting a year and then catching up really fast.
Yeah, and one of the reasons for that is that technology continues to advance. Gina?
The other thing is when we think of infrastructure, even how we're going to deliver infrastructure is different as infrastructure as code keeps becoming more and more a thing that we can use. So with Andy's example that he gave, I think the way we get to the cloud-like or whatever adjective we're going to call it is what companies build as a platform, and they decide with infrastructure as code where the applications or workloads will go and how to access the data. So that means that the underlying infrastructure, the actual physical infrastructure, is even more important than it was before, because we're going to abstract everything, not just the servers, not just the switches, everything, and we're going to combine those with real cloud hyperscaler algorithms, and we're going to do things, well, we're not going to, but someone's going to make an application that does very different things than we're used to it doing now and supporting now. So the infrastructure is even more important.
Infrastructure as code is great, and it's all software driven, et cetera, but in the end, there's some hardware underneath all that stuff.
Yep.
It's got to be there in order to support infrastructure as code or any of the applications or any of these solutions that we're talking about.
So it's not serverless.
It may talk about serverless, but in reality, there is a server someplace that's going to support that activity.
But the job is, and that's what makes it even harder. Think about the stuff we've gone through with VMware, right? For just an example of that abstraction. Sure, we can tell the developers, the software engineers, yeah, it's serverless, go for it. Here you go play here. In reality, we know where the servers are, and we know how they're talking to everything. We know where the data is. We're securing it. We're backing it up. We know how to bring it back if somebody cuts a cable or something crazy happens. That's our job as storage people, as infrastructure people, is to know that, but to provide it in a serverless manner so they can go and create.
I once told Ray that you can't actually store bits in middleware.
You did tell me that one time.
Yeah, they want resources.
I did want to address something that Frederic said, where it's not only that you don't want to spend everything all at once, but if we get back to our ESG discussions from previously, there's no point in spending everything all at once if it's most of it is going to sit idle. There's no reason to have equipment powered on in your data center if you're not going to use it. Buy stuff as you need it and use it as you need it, rather than buying way more excess capacity than you need and sitting there both powering it and cooling it.
It's a major driver of the OEMs as a services, by the way, is ESG. Yep.
Sorry, but if I can add something here. A few years ago, we didn't have the mechanism to spend money differently. I mean, the purchase process was so complicated and so long in large enterprises that many of the CIOs, many of the VPs involved in the decision making were buying more than actually was needed, because was so difficult to go back to the purchasing department, restart every dealing, etc., etc. So they were planning on the 3-5 years basis just because it was so complicated. Now that we have the cloud, many people finally understood the pay-as-you-go model, and in fact, we have the pay-as-you-go model applied to hardware as well from many vendors. So, to Frederic point again, so it's easier now to have this methodology. I mean, so spend when you need it. Even if you spend a little bit more, you are spending better. So the way we provision infrastructure today is changed because now we have the tools to do it, and probably everybody has matured a little bit.
I mean, if the question is, are infrastructure admins managing more infrastructure today than they were yesterday or the day before or 10 years ago? Absolutely. And they're talking, they're moving from terabytes to petabytes nowadays, and a damn 2U rack into. Yeah, so they are doing that, but infrastructure still matters, and it's not going to go away. It may become simpler to use, it may become simpler to consume, and on-demand models may come into existence, but the infrastructure is there.
And if you're managing virtual infrastructure in the cloud, you're still managing infrastructure. Infrastructure as a service is still infrastructure. Yes. So it's actually harder to manage cloud infrastructure than to manage on-prem infrastructure, because you're out of control of a lot of the domains that you're dealing with. Yeah, it's someone else's servers, but you still have to deal with all the constraints. So it's like, yeah, you're still working with infrastructure. Now you get to SaaS, that's a different story. That's a complete solution, and you're getting a lot of value out of that. And that's what why a lot of businesses are really moving there. You're not saving any administrative money at all going to infrastructure as a service in the cloud. That's
But
why.
again, we had a maturation here. I mean, so think about the discussion that we had a few years back about pets and cattle, and now everything is becoming cattle. I mean, so Kubernetes application are cattle anyway. So you have plenty of small containers running services and connected together. And if one container dies, it's dead. There is something that will, spin it up again somewhere else. You don't care. 20 years ago, it was just about monolithic application connected to databases, treat-tier application, and that was it. Everything was monolithic. Actually, most of the services were run on SMP servers. So everything is changed. Now we have the technology, so we can think about infrastructure differently.
Well, maybe that's the problem, is that we are thinking about infrastructure differently. So let me rephrase the question from the beginning here. So clearly, I'm thrilled to hear that infrastructure still matters, but I am still hearing not about the same kind of components we used to talk about. We're not talking about hardware, things that you hold in your hand. We're talking about collections of those. We're talking about systems, not devices. And I think that maybe that's really sort of the thing where the line is moving. There was a time when systems engineers had soldering irons in their kit. They don't do that anymore because that doesn't matter anymore. That infrastructure is not something that they look after. Now, there was a time when they would carry around an extra hard drives or extra controllers, extra memory. Did they do that anymore? I don't know. There's the line is moving up. And the question is, I guess, where is the line? Where is infrastructure now? Because I'm hearing a lot about infrastructure as a service, and I'm hearing about Kubernetes, and I'm hearing about cattle. And, is that still infrastructure? Does it still matter, Gina?
The thing is, I want to kind of challenge the idea that SaaS isn't an infrastructure you have to manage, because you don't have to manage the physical part of it. We're just talking about blast radiuses. And if your OneDrive or your SharePoint implementation gets infected by syncing with ransomware endpoint.
That's not an infrastructure blast radius. That's a logical blast radius. We're talking about, if you're talking about infrastructure blast radius and the density of a drive, that's what you're talking about is absolutely irrelevant.
I said blast radius. I didn't say it.
Right. That's a software application level blast radius, and it's absolutely valid. Absolutely valid.
But that's what I'm saying. It's like we're talking about blast radiuses, right? So the blast radius is, if this knocks me out of business, I better have known that I need to back it up. I need a recovery system. I need to know everything that with my data that something could happen in a SaaS application.
I think the point is with SaaS, right? And for better or worse, when you're going with a SaaS provider, you are throwing all these problems over the wall for the SaaS provider. You're assuming, maybe not correctly, that they're going to deal with this. Now you have to do your homework and say, okay, where is my data stored, right? And do they have my back on this? And that's your choice to do that.
Are you backing up data that's in a SaaS solution?
You're hoping your SaaS provider does.
No, you are backing it up.
You have to back it up. That's what you do. That's why you
it depends on the SaaS provider. I agree with you.
I agree.
It has to be backed up, whether you're backing it up or not. Who does that, right? You can have another service, another SaaS
Okay, so
provider
my point was that if you're trusting a SaaS application for whatever, and there's lots of reasons to do that because it's a good use of everything. You have to manage now, first of all, by the policies and by the contract that you sign with that SaaS provider. You have to know it inside and out, and you better damn well know if they're backing up their data or not, and you better have a solution to it if you care about the data generated in that.
But the question was about infrastructure. None of that had anything to do with infrastructure.
I disagree, and that's why I'm saying. I'm saying if we're saying that infrastructure is code, which is you owning that abstraction.
I never said that. Infrastructure as code is a way to deploy infrastructure and define a generic for infrastructure, but it's not infrastructure.
No.
Infrastructure is servers, drives, network, memory.
I actually agree with her on this one, where if the infrastructure, the hardware infrastructure might not be under your desk anymore. The hardware infrastructure might be somewhere else. 20 years ago, you might have needed to back up your PC to a zip drive or whatever you backed up your PC to 20 years ago. Now, you better hope that whoever's providing you your cloud-like experience, your SaaS experience, is doing the same thing for you.
I don't disagree with you.
And in both cases, those are both hardware infrastructure being taken care of. It's just you are not consuming it the same.
That's the point. It's a stratification I said before. That's my point. You're agreeing with everything I said. So, okay. My point is that you are now a consumer.
I'm agreeing.
You're at some point, to Stephen's point, okay, at the end of the day, so for instance, there's companies out there that I may know of, right, that sell bare metal servers, right, that give you a server, a physical server, all to yourself, that has CPUs, that has RAM, that has PCI, and has that infrastructure. And by the definition of a bare metal server service is that they're renting you a server that's somewhere in a rack, somewhere connected to a physical network, and you're not sharing that. It's your responsibility to manage the server that is a physical asset. Now you could do it as
what if I put
infrastructure
VMware on it?
That's a layer above this, okay?
Yeah.
You can do whatever you want with it, right? It's your responsibility to manage the VMware, but now you're managing VMware. That's not the infrastructure. That's software on the
VMware
infrastructure.
is infrastructure.
It's software.
Okay.
VMware is infrastructure. I'll step in there. So
software
I think
runs on a box.
I think it's moving, again, it's moving the level up of where we consider infrastructure.
How you define it.
Do we? I mean, so certainly, I think a physical server or a virtual or a private bare metal server in the cloud is infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
I think that a virtual machine is infrastructure by definition. A virtual machine is a virtual machine. It is a pretend server.
It's a layer
That
up.
doesn't make it any less of a server, but it's still a pretend server.
It's a layer up, though.
Yeah, I don't think so.
But
This
Layer up,
is
physically.
semantics, though,
If
because
you
your
run a
entire
bare metal
Kubernetes
server-
cluster is infrastructure.
Yep.
Yeah.
Agree to that too.
And that's where I was going to go next, Richard. Thank you. Because that's the next question is, okay, so virtual machines, then containers,
Yep.
then container orchestration, then platform as a service, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Where's the storage anymore in this? Because we're at Storage Field Day.
Everywhere.
It's still there. But I think that's what's so important because Ray is right about that. You still have to, there might be fewer people that are managing it, but you still have to have people that understand what the heck is going on under the covers. And I really am worried.
I don't disagree
The
with
things
that.
I think about is, I would like to retire sometime soon. So how do we bring the new generation in?
Yeah.
We talked about this, I think, the last time I was with you. Like how do we bring that new generation in so that they don't have to go through the things we've gone through for the past 20, 25 years in our career and learn, we can teach them how to do it, and they will embrace this whole idea of all of these different layers of things are their responsibility now as well.
I guess to the
All
people
of the
point, though,
stackers.
here's the point that I want to make on this, Gina. So this is,
Man,
I think I need to make you understand where I draw the line and why, right? So you have those people who understand the virtual, who are VMware experts, who understand the virtualization layers and can lay out a virtual cluster. And it doesn't have to be VMware, any hypervisor, right? Or cloud-like, or containers, and all those things. And there are people who are required to do that. Take those same people, put them in a data center where you have to manage bare metal. And I've seen this firsthand. They won't even know how to turn on anything. It's a completely different skill set to manage physical infrastructure at scale. It's a different science. All right, I've seen it.
Both. I did it both as a customer.
The one, they are. You may have two skill sets. That's not
I have
what's going
lots
on.
of skill sets.
But I love.
Just like Liam Neeson.
But that is not what's going on today. Today you're going to be a.
And that
platform.
I think that is a very generalized statement, and
see it.
it is a. I know you see it, but I think what size are those organizations? That's what I would push back on.
Large.
I think that large organizations have absolutely caused a lot of the drama and trouble that we see.
Agreed.
Because they have created these silos. If they have created a silo where someone doesn't know how to do storage and do sysadmin and do VMware, that's on them.
Things have gotten a lot more complex than they used to be, though.
Is the unit of infrastructure that's being managed going up? Yes, obviously it is. And is the fact that infrastructure as code is changing what infrastructure engineers do today versus what they did 5-10 years ago? Absolutely. And they're not touching the hardware anymore. And to a large extent, there's a select group of people that do that, and the vast majority don't. It's all being software driven. So the abstraction is going up. The units of management are going up. So those sorts of skills are happening. The question I always ask myself, if I'm going to use a SaaS service, do I want to back up my own data or not? I mean, that's still a question there. And if I have to back up my own data, then I'm thinking more and more of the infrastructure is not quite abstracted completely yet.
True,
I would agree with that.
part of all of these things increasing in size are the commoditization of all of the components, where you don't have single CPU systems sitting around anymore. You don't have single drives that you need to back up individually anymore. You don't have, serial cables that you need to plug into the back of your machine underneath your desk. If all of this infrastructure is now commoditized and in a data center, and I mean, you might not even have a wire connected to whatever's on your desktop in your office. Lots of times you will, but it will be a single wire, and that's it. And so I think the infrastructure has been commoditized to the point where you actually can scale it to be multi-user rather than individual.
And that's what service providers are doing today, right?
Technology is different, guys. I mean, so do you remember short stroking, for example? I mean, how many hours did I spend trying to optimize all the partition of a new array, get the best performance from that 20-30% of the drive? That was crazy. I mean, you don't need any of this anymore. You don't need specialized or senior storage admins. I mean, just they are all generalists today because everything is automatic, is simplified. We have millions of IOPS from a single device instead of 100. So it's, things have changed a little bit.
Yeah.
Just a bit.
If I can jump in, guys, I think it's really a matter of perspective because, what are we talking about when we talk about infrastructure? Do we care about the hardware? We do need it. But if you look at what we saw yesterday when we're looking at some of the storage arrays, if you look at it, it goes back to what Enrico said. The technology has become very commoditized. The features are table stakes in most systems. So most of the value and the differentiators that you find in solutions are adjacent to the infrastructure stack, to the pure, let's say, hardware level. Right, there's going to be maybe something mid-range will not have all of the features, but in general, it's going to be more or less at the same level. So when you're comparing, one to another system, you will find that something has better management, something has, better ransomware protection or this or that, but the key features are all the same. You don't care anymore, right? You're expecting to get all of that, the data services, the compression, the deduplication, the performance, the reliability, it's all there. You are not tweaking that anymore. So on one hand, you do need the infrastructure, but what do you need today? I mean, it has gone up the stack.
I think that you guys are exactly right. The thing that has happened is that the point that we consider no longer worth focusing on from a IT systems or storage perspective has moved. And in answer to Gina's question, which is very true, who's going to manage this stuff in the future? Max just answered it, I think, which is essentially that nobody's going to manage this stuff in the future. Just like somebody's not going to be resoldering the chips on the board in production anymore. We've moved on. We don't care about individual drives. We don't care about cables. To Andy's point, maybe it's all cattle now, and the future IT architects, infrastructure architects are going to be talking about infrastructure, and they're going to be really talking about infrastructure as code. And I think that that's the future. So thank you very much for this discussion. The question at the top was, does infrastructure matter anymore? I think the answer is the definition of infrastructure has changed, and it does matter, but only if you define it in a way that it matters. If you've enjoyed this discussion, please head over to YouTube/Tech Field Day, where you'll find more videos. You can also find more information about this event that we're recording this discussion at by going to techfieldday.com and clicking on Storage Field Day 24.